We're here in Clyde. Galen Historical Society member Tom Sawtelle is going to be giving us a talk on the Blockhouse on August 17th, 2019.
During the French and Indian War, they built forts among the Iroquois Indians, and this is one of them here. And the fort was designed to have two blockhouses at opposite corners. There's a diorama upstairs. The blockhouses built at that time were designed to be 24-foot square. So we believe this was the original trading post. It was less of a military barracks than the later blockhouse. And probably when British troops finally gave up the fort about 1767 or 1768, they probably pulled down the old blockhouse. That was rather typical of the period.
The other question was, has there been any archaeological digs or anything of that around here?
No, there hasn't been. The only thing that was found, and it wasn't an archaeological dig, when the railroad came through in the 1850s, they dug up a number of trade axes, and they were essentially this. And if you go to the Brick Church Museum over by the park, that'll be open today too, there is a head, an axe head in there that was found in the ruins of the blockhouse in 1852. What they did is they leveled the site where the fort was to build up the railroad embankment. Took the earth and moved it. So they pretty much obliterated the site, and a lot of it is underneath the railroad now. So there's really no way to do a survey. I suppose you could do a little bit right along the river and see if you found anything. There's a few items upstairs that have been found in the river that may or may not be associated with the fort. It's kind of hard to say. But as far as an actual archaeological thing, no.
Yeah, I mean, you got all around here. Could be, you know, coins or metal objects, a metal detector
Buttons.
or something, buttons, any type of thing that if it would be somebody stumbled upon, more or less.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have the blockhouse set up kind of like a small trading post. There probably would have been some more supplies in here, but you know, we're slowly adding to things. But you know, Native Americans would have come here and stopped and traded furs. Actually, I'll have to get it. I haven't got it out yet, but I have a beaver pelt, which is really the premier fur they were trading at the time. But other things as well. There'd be some local trade going on. And traders that were here, English traders after 1722, prior to that the French were here with some sort of small trading post as well. They both did pretty much the same thing, traded with the local Seneca and Cayuga nations.
Now, travel was primarily the river.
The river or some of the trails. There was the Ontario footpath, which is essentially 104 up in the north part of the county, and there was a trail coming down from Sodus Bay through here. And then all the way to Geneva.
That'd be like 414 would have probably been?
Yeah, 414 would have been about right. 414 maybe kind of getting over toward Route 14 because it went to Geneva.
Somewhere in between them.
Yeah, and there's a map upstairs I can show you that's got, that shows that trail on it. It's kind of interesting. It's from the 1750s. Map. So, you know, common trade items were guns and gunpowder and lead shot and kettles and cooking pots and some agricultural implements, things like that they would trade with the Native Americans. They also would tend to trade them alcohol, even though they weren't supposed to trade them alcohol. You had a lot of independent traders who were out there, and they would do that. They would typically do that before they bought the furs, so that
get them in a good mood.
Get them in a good mood to sell their furs and make a big profit, you know, type of thing. So, common weapons on the frontier, trade axes, the tomahawks we call them, belt axes sometimes. Those were commonly traded. It was a lot better than using a flint axe, and a lot easier to go trade for one than to create one. So once the iron implements started to get traded, it was very common. This would have been typical of kind of an Indian trade musket. It's essentially, this is actually a non-firing replica of a Brown Bess. It actually looks a little bit more like a trade musket, the way this particular replica is made. And this is one that's been shortened about 8 inches from the short land version. And this is a lot easier to use in the wilderness, running through the woods, than one that's 8 inches longer and actually a little more balanced.
Where were they made?
These are made in England. Yeah. There were some local producers too. In the Revolution, the colonies started producing knockoffs of this gun for the Continental Army. Eventually the French started to produce, bring guns in for the Americans during the Revolution. But that was a very common gun. That gun actually came into service about 1722, the same time that the Blockhouse was built, and was in service right through the Napoleonic Wars, up into even the 1840s. So it was in service for about 90 years.
Now the French and Indian Wars, what year were they started?
1754 to 1760. 63.
63. Oh.
Yeah, so the bulk of the fighting went on up through 1760.
And that was, where was the bulk of the fighting at?
Actually, a lot of it occurred in New York.
Around Lake Champlain, or more
this way as well as Lake Champlain. Actually, at noon and 1 o'clock and 3, I'm sorry. I'm doing a little spiel on the sieges of Oswego and Niagara during the French and Indian War. But in a nutshell, the French besieged Oswego in 1756. The British besieged Fort Niagara in 1759. There was Fort William Henry up on Lake George was attacked by the French and destroyed in 1757. You had the Battle of Lake George in 1755. You had the Battle of Ticonderoga, 1758, which was actually the bloodiest battle of the French and Indian War. Most people think of Ticonderoga and the Green Mountain Boys capturing it without a shot during the Revolution. It was actually the scene of a huge bloody battle between the French and the English.
Yeah, I've been to the Fort Ticonderoga.
Yeah.
I remember their reenactment, their presentation, all that about the siege.
Yeah, so a lot of it went on. There was some that happened up in Canada as well.
Well, what I'm trying to do is tie this all in together. It's what my head.
Yes. And this post here, when it was first established, you have to kind of think of the south shore of Lake Ontario as being kind of like a superhighway, kind of like a thruway, okay? So by the time the 1700s rolled around, there wasn't a lot of beaver left in New York. They've been hunted virtually to extinction.
Really?
So most of the beaver was coming from the Ohio country and the upper Great Lakes. And so what would happen is the Iroquois would allow, because they controlled the area, Native Americans from that territory, those areas, to come through and trade. And most of that territory was considered to be French. So they were supposed to go trade at Montreal. But once in a while, they would divert to Albany, because there was competition between Montreal and Albany and the fur traders. And hey, we got better prices over here. It's kind of like McDonald's and Burger King, okay, trying to get your money. And what would happen is they would sometimes divert along one of the routes along the south shore of Lake Ontario. So it might have been Oswego originally, and they would go to Albany. The French got wind of this, kind of set up a little roadblock, a little trading post, and tried to intercept and get the furs before they got to Albany, or to turn them back. And then they would find a different spot, a different exit to get off that trade route. So Sodus Bay became one of those. And the French were here, and they were intercepting some of these, what they called far Indians, or sometimes fur Indians, from going to Albany. And then eventually they tried to do it at Irondequoit, and eventually wound up at Niagara. They kept moving back a little to the west until they found the right pinch point. And so the English came in, as soon as they moved off to Irondequoit, the English moved in, and they actually, once they evacuated Irondequoit, they put posts at Irondequoit, Sodus Bay, and here, which was along that route, to try to secure the trade. And that's how this post got built. So again, they were then trying to get the trade and also try to secure the trail.
So
this commanded the river and the trail.
Yeah, so this one, right, from anybody first traded here would go directly onto the river and go east.
Yeah, this was a stopping point, basically.
It'd take you right into the Hudson River or to Albany?
Yep, you can take the Clyde River to the Seneca, into the Oswego River, and up through Oneida Lake. And then up near Rome and Fort Stanwix was the main portage to the Mohawk River. And from there you can go right to Albany and the Hudson River and beyond.
Most all the furs went overseas, England and stuff
like that. And then they shipped them to Europe because they loved beaver hats and everything else, so that was what they did. Now, this post wound up afterwards, especially during the French and Indian War, as being kind of a sub-post of Oswego, Fort Ontario. It would have been an outpost, more or less. And then during the Revolutionary War, when the British didn't have a fort during much of that time at Oswego, it was kind of a sub-post or a supply depot for goods, things being shipped to the Native Americans and Butler's Rangers and other loyalists here.
Is there a lot of written record where you can verify a lot of this stuff?
It's a little bit of a gray area to a lot of this. There is a good written record on what it is, but piecing the pieces together and getting all the corroborating evidence has been kind of fun. There is corroborating evidence for the general story of the Blockhouse, though. It does seem to be largely true. A little bit of the timing's a little off. For example, the story is that the Blockhouse was burned in 1800. Now, if you start looking back into the earlier histories, it'll say before 1800, and then it says near the end of the Revolution, and it turns out it was actually in 1788. It talks about a government expedition came through here and burned the Blockhouse and drove out a bunch of squatters. Well, that happened in 1788. There was a sheriff, William Colbreth, from Herkimer County. This was apparently part of Herkimer County at the time. And there were squatters. They were former loyalists. It was guys from Butler's Rangers, and yes, they're mostly white people, and they were smuggling and trading with the Indians. They were trying to keep them out of negotiations with New York State for their land. They were kind of wheeling and dealing to get the land themselves. In Geneva, I forget the year, I think it was 1787, but they signed a long lease with the Iroquois to get their land for like 999 years or something, right? And the state got wind of this and said, enough's enough. You know, you have no business wheeling and dealing with them, only we should be wheeling and dealing with them. And so that's when they sent the troops in, and apparently during that raid is when the Blockhouse got burned. So, and there were orders to burn the buildings of the squatters that were here in the military tract, which was what that area was called. There's a map of it upstairs. So that story does seem to be true, but it didn't happen in 1800. I always found that to be odd because there was no stories, except from very old trappers that had been in the area, of the Blockhouse ever being intact prior to settlement of Wayne County. And so 1788 is the year before.
When was the first families
in Clyde?
Clyde.
In Galen, it was about 1800. The first settlers were 1800, and they brought their families the following year, 1801. In Clyde, it was about 1810. We've got two stories. One says 1809, one says 1811. So we say circa 1810.
1817.
1817, our relatives came in.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
And Shepherd's Corners.
Yep. Okay.
They were shepherds.
Yeah, so that's right in that very early period of settlement. Yeah, anything that was about 1810 to 1820 is that first decade of real settlement here in Clyde and Galen. There was a little bit, in 1800, 1801, but not an awful lot. And then, of course, the Erie Canal, just like every place else through here, really caused everything to go boom. Yes, absolutely. And then the railroad after that. So, anyway, so there's some, possible trade goods.
This was rebuilt?
This was rebuilt during the bicentennial.
Yeah, by the shop teacher here in Clyde, which was my shop teacher at the time. And he built it. I didn't realize much on it, too young to realize the history behind it. So.
Right. Well, we're very fortunate that he had the foresight to build this and had, and that people got together and did it, because it's one of only a handful of reconstructed blockhouses in New York State. There's only, I think, 4 that aren't at one of the major forts. There's only really 4, and this is one of them. So we have a unique little place here, and we've been trying to take advantage of it because it is here. We're fortunate to have it.
Get tourists. Trying to
I just had 2 people stop before you did that didn't even know we were open today, and they happened to be driving by and they came in and took a quick tour.
Is it open to the public? And also, are the artifacts in here during left in here?
Some of it is left in here. We don't leave everything in here all year long because it's not heated or anything. And we do.
Well, I'm
pack
just
some
trying to
stuff
say
up.
if somebody wanted to come down and visit it during
Yes.
the week or something.
Yeah, anytime somebody wants to, just you can either contact me or contact the Village of Clyde, and we'll let people come. We have that. It happens a couple times a year. We also, you know, we've had a couple of school groups that come through. We've had it open. I think this is the third time now this year we've had it open to the public, and we do have it open about another 3 times this year, 3 or 4. We're going to have it open up through into the fall, but we actually have.
Yeah.
You probably
I
seen
got
that,
the
right?
flyer.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Tell us
Yeah.
about September 7th.
All right, so September 7th is going to be an encampment of British reenactors. I should say they're reenactors portraying British soldiers, and they're pretty much all reenactors from upstate New York. They're going to be here camping out. I guess we have at least 8 or 10 of them, and there may be as many as a dozen, maybe even 15 that
Great.
show up. So it went from a small group to a bigger group. We're fortunate. And they're going to do musket demonstrations and drills and cooking demonstrations. There's going to be women's fashions and things like that. So
Very
stuff for
nice.
kids to do. They'll be camped out right around the Blockhouse here. So you'll have probably half a dozen tents and canopies set up, and it'll be pretty cool.
Yeah.
So hopefully the weather will be great.
Of
and
course.
everybody will enjoy it. We've put a lot of word out, so I think there'll be a fair number of people here.
Great.
Can we go upstairs?
Absolutely.